The morning air hung thick and humid over the Imperial Japanese Army proving grounds at Chiba, northeast of Tokyo, on August 7, 1944. Lieutenant Colonel Hara Masao stood beside a freshly painted olive-green machine, his hand resting against cold American steel. The M4 Sherman medium tank, captured intact on Saipan just weeks earlier, sat silent in the summer heat, its white star still visible beneath hastily applied Japanese markings. Around him, engineers from the 4th Army Technical Bureau held clipboards, their faces betraying nothing. But Hara knew what they were thinking. He was thinking it too. They had been lied to. For 3 years, the Imperial General Headquarters had assured Japan's tank forces that their medium tanks were comparable to anything the Americans could field. The Type 97 Chiha, backbone of Japanese armored units since 1937, was declared sufficient. The newer Type 1 Chi-He, entering service in 1943, was supposedly superior. Japanese tank doctrine emphasized speed, maneuverability, and infantry support over heavy armor, a philosophy born from campaigns in China where opposition was minimal. The Americans, they were told, built crude, mechanically unreliable machines that would crumble under proper Japanese tactics. Now, standing beside this captured Sherman, Hara understood that every assumption had been catastrophically wrong. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Sherman's journey to Japan had been extraordinary in itself. During the savage battle for Saipan in June and July of 1944, a single M4A2 Sherman from the 2nd Marine Tank Battalion had become separated from its unit during fighting near Mount Tapocho. A mechanical failure, ironically a throne track, had stranded the 30-ton vehicle in a ravine. The crew, under heavy fire, had no choice but to abandon it. Japanese forces, expecting to find a burned-out hulk, instead discovered a nearly intact tank with only minor damage. Colonel Hideyuki Takashina, commanding Japanese forces on Saipan, recognized the intelligence value immediately. He ordered engineers to repair the track under cover of darkness and move the vehicle to the island's remaining harbor facilities. Getting the Sherman to Japan before Saipan fell completely required desperate improvisation. On July 3, 1944, with American forces closing in, Japanese engineers loaded the tank onto a fast transport vessel, the Taiho Maru, one of the last ships to escape the island before the garrison's final stand. The transport made a harrowing journey through submarine-infested waters, zigzagging northward for 6 days before reaching Yokosuka Naval Base. From there, the Sherman was transported by rail to the Army's testing facility at Chiba. Arriving on July 23rd, the operation, from capture to Japanese soil, had taken less than a month. It was an extraordinary effort, and it would reveal an extraordinary truth. Lieutenant Colonel Hara had commanded Type 97 Chiha tanks during the Malayan Campaign in 1941 and 1942. He had fought British Matilda II tanks and emerged victorious, though even then he'd been disturbed by how little his 37mm gun affected the British armor. Against thin-skinned British tanks like the Stuart and outdated models, Japanese tanks had performed adequately. Against anything heavier they struggled, but the official reports always emphasized Japanese tactical superiority, not material deficiencies. Tank battles were rare in the Pacific anyway. Most Japanese armor fought infantry, supported coastal defenses, or remained in reserve on the home islands, preparing for the invasion everyone knew was coming. Now, in mid-1944, with American forces advancing across the Pacific, the question of Japanese tank quality had become existentially urgent. Could Japan's tanks stop American armor if the war came to the home islands? The captured Sherman would provide the answer. The testing program began on August 8, 1944, with a comprehensive examination of the Sherman's basic specifications. Japanese engineers measured, weighed, and documented every aspect of the vehicle. The results were disturbing. The Sherman weighed 30.3 tons in its M4A2 configuration, nearly double the 15 tons of the Type 97 Chiha. The American tank's diesel engine produced 375 horsepower. The Chiha's air-cooled diesel generated just 170. The Sherman's maximum armor thickness reached 76 millimeters on the front glacis, angled at 56 degrees from vertical. The Chiha's thickest armor was 25 millimeters, with minimal sloping. But the gun was what made Hara's stomach tighten. The Sherman mounted a 75 millimeter M3 gun with a barrel length of 37.5 calibers, a dual-purpose weapon effective against both armor and fortifications. Japanese intelligence had known about this gun, but seeing it up close was different. The breech mechanism was beautifully engineered, the recoil system sophisticated, the ammunition stowage protected and accessible. By comparison, the Type 97 Chiha's 47 millimeter gun, a 1938 upgrade from the original 37 millimeter weapon, looked like a museum piece. The Type 1 Chi-hei, Japan's newest medium tank, mounted the same 47 millimeter gun. Not even Japan's heaviest operational tank, the Type 3 Chi-nu, exceeded 75 millimeters in main armament. The engineers compiled their measurements into a preliminary report dated August 12, 1944. The document, preserved in Japanese military archives, is striking for its clinical tone barely concealing. Profound alarm. The enemy's M4 medium tank represents a combat capability substantially exceeding previous intelligence estimates, it noted. Comparative analysis suggests significant deficiencies in current IJA medium tank design philosophy. Hara read the report in his quarters that evening, and one paragraph stopped him cold. The Sherman's combination of mobility, armor protection, and firepower creates a balanced combat system that our Type 97 and Type 1 tanks cannot match in any single category. More concerning, the Sherman appears designed for mass production at a scale incompatible with our industrial capacity. That last sentence was the quiet part, the thing no one wanted to say aloud. It wasn't just that the Sherman was better. It was that the Americans could make thousands of them. The next phase of testing began on August 15, 1944. Ironically, the same date that would mark Japan's surrender exactly 1 year later. Engineers needed to understand the Sherman's internal systems, so they began a systematic disassembly. What they found inside the turret shocked them more than the gun itself. The Sherman's turret basket, a rotating floor that turned with the turret, allowing the crew to move easily, was a revelation. Japanese tanks had no such feature. In a Chiha or Chi-hei, the turret crew had to maintain their balance on a stationary floor while the turret rotated around them, stepping over transmission components and ammunition racks. The Sherman's crew worked on a stable platform with everything they needed within arm's reach. This wasn't just a comfort feature, it was a combat multiplier. American crews could acquire, engage, and destroy targets faster because their working environment was ergonomically designed for sustained combat. The gun stabilizer was another disturbing discovery. The Sherman's M4 gyro stabilizer, while only operative in the vertical plane, allowed the tank to fire accurately while moving, something Japanese tank doctrine considered impossible. Japanese tanks had to stop to shoot with any hope of accuracy. The Sherman could keep moving, making it harder to hit while maintaining offensive capability. In actual combat, this advantage was often limited by crew training and mechanical reliability. But the principle was sound, and it represented a design philosophy Japanese engineers had never seriously considered. Then there was the internal communication system. The Sherman had an intercom, allowing all 5 crew members to communicate clearly even during combat. Japanese tanks relied on the crew shouting over engine noise or hitting each other to relay commands. During the disassembly, a young engineer named Tanaka Hiroshi, examining the radio equipment, made an observation that the testing team included in their report. The enemy tank contains more electrical wiring than some Japanese destroyers. The complexity suggests an industrial base with entirely different assumptions about what is possible to manufacture reliably. The armor metallurgy presented another challenge. Japanese engineers removed several plates for analysis, sending them to the Imperial Army's metallurgical laboratory in Sagamihara. The report, dated August 25, 1944, confirmed that American armor steel met or exceeded Japanese specifications in tensile strength and hardness. More importantly, the plates showed consistent quality with minimal defects, a sign of mature, well-controlled industrial processes. Japanese armor production, struggling with raw material shortages and inconsistent quality control, could not match this reliability at scale. On August 28, 1944, the testing program moved to its most critical phase, live fire evaluation. The engineers had restored the Sherman to running condition, and now they needed to understand its combat capability from the inside. Lieutenant Colonel Hara volunteered to command the Sherman during the tests. He wanted to feel what American tank crews felt, to understand the machine as they understood it. Climbing into the Sherman's commander's cupola, Hara immediately noticed the visibility. The cupola rotated independently, fitted with 6 vision blocks providing near 360-degree observation. The Type 97 Chiha had vision slits that severely restricted the commander's awareness. In the Sherman, Hara could see everything. He could identify threats, direct his crew, and maintain situational awareness in ways impossible in Japanese tanks. This single feature, better visibility, could mean the difference between life and death in combat. The driver's position, which Hara examined next, was equally superior. The Sherman's driver sat in a well-designed compartment with adequate lighting, clear instruments, and reasonable access to controls. Japanese tank drivers worked in cramped, poorly lit spaces with awkward control layouts that required significant physical strength to operate for extended periods. The Sherman's assisted steering, using a hydraulic system to reduce driver effort, was particularly striking. Japanese tanks used clutch and brake steering that exhausted drivers during long movements. During the first live fire test on August 30, 1944, Hara commanded the Sherman as it engaged simulated targets at the Chiba range. The turret traversed smoothly, the gun stabilizer worked adequately, and the main gun fired with remarkable accuracy. The crew, Japanese tank specialists, cross-trained on captured equipment, quickly adapted to the Sherman systems. Within hours, they were engaging targets faster and more accurately than they could in any Japanese tank. But it was the ammunition that truly revealed the disparity. The Sherman carried 71 rounds of 75mm ammunition in protected racks with wet stowage. Ammunition surrounded by water glycerin solution to prevent fires if the tank was penetrated. Japanese tanks stored ammunition loosely with minimal protection, making them catastrophically vulnerable to brewing up, exploding into flames when hit. The Sherman's design assumed the tank would be hit and tried to protect the crew anyway. Japanese design assumed tanks wouldn't be hit, or if they were, the crew was expendable. The American armor-piercing rounds were particularly impressive. The M61 armor-piercing capped projectile could penetrate 92 millimeters of armor at 500 meters, enough to defeat any German or Japanese tank's frontal armor at combat range. The high-explosive rounds were equally capable, with enough filler to destroy fortifications or infantry positions effectively. By comparison, Japanese 47mm ammunition was marginal against modern armor and inadequate for heavy infantry support. After 2 days of live fire testing, Hara submitted his tactical evaluation on September 2, 1944. The document pulls no punches. Engagement of the M4 Sherman with current IJA medium tanks would result in decisive enemy superiority in all combat scenarios. The Sherman crew can identify, engage, and destroy Japanese tanks at ranges where Japanese guns cannot effectively penetrate Sherman armor. The enemy's superior optics, stabilization, and traverse rate provide overwhelming first-shot advantage. Crew survivability heavily favors the Sherman in all circumstances. The report included specific engagement simulations. In a head-to-head encounter at 800 meters, typical combat range in open terrain, a Sherman could penetrate a Type 97 Chiha's frontal armor with ease, while the Chiha's 47mm gun would struggle to penetrate the Sherman's front. Even at point-blank range, the Chiha would need to target specific weak points, the lower hull sides, the turret ring, or the rear engine deck. The Sherman could hit the Chiha anywhere and expect a penetration. Against the newer Type 1 Chi-He, the situation was marginally better but still hopeless. The Chi-He's improved armor, maximum 50mm, might stop a Sherman round at extreme range or with a lucky angle, but the Sherman's armor would reliably defeat the Chi-He's gun at all practical ranges. Even Japan's heaviest operational tank, the Type 3 Chi-Nu, which mounted a newer 75mm gun derived from a naval weapon, was questionable. The Chi-Nu's gun had better penetration than earlier Japanese tank guns, but the vehicle itself was under-armored and still used the old Chi-He chassis. The testing team's final comprehensive report, submitted to the 4th Army Technical Bureau on September 12, 1944, is one of the most sobering documents in Japanese military archives. Running to 137 pages with technical appendices, it methodically dismantled every assumption that had guided Japanese tank development for a decade. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The report's executive summary stated, "The M4 Sherman represents a fundamental paradigm in armored vehicle design that the Imperial Japanese Army has not achieved. The vehicle's integration of firepower, protection, and mobility at approximately 30 tons creates a combat system qualitatively superior to any IJA tank in service or development. More significantly, the Sherman's design prioritizes crew efficiency, survivability, and sustained combat capability over unit cost, a philosophy possible only with vast industrial resources and assumptions about acceptable production complexity." The report went on to estimate American production capacity based on the Sherman's construction complexity. The captured tank showed signs of mass production, standardized parts, modular components, and design choices that prioritized manufacturability. There were multiple manufacturers' marks inside the vehicle, indicating a distributed production system. Based on these observations, Japanese intelligence estimated, correctly it would turn out, that American industry was producing thousands of Sherman tanks annually. This was the truly terrifying discovery. It wasn't just that the Sherman was superior to Japanese tanks. It was that America was producing superior tanks in quantities Japan couldn't possibly match with any design. Japanese tank production in 1944 would total approximately 1,300 vehicles of all types, light, medium, and heavy. American Sherman production alone that year would exceed 17,000 units. Japan was losing a quality war and a quantity war simultaneously. The implications were catastrophic. If American forces invaded the home islands, They would bring hundreds or thousands of Sherman tanks against Japanese defenders equipped with obsolete armor. Japanese forces had no effective counter. The Type 4 Chito medium tank, still in development, might achieve parity with the Sherman in firepower, but it was heavier, more complex, and production was projected at perhaps 50 units by war's end. The Type 5 Chi-Ri, an even more ambitious design, existed only as a prototype. Japan's tank industry couldn't scale up production of modern designs fast enough to matter. The report concluded with recommendations that read like an admission of defeat. Given material constraints and current industrial capacity, the IJA cannot achieve parity with enemy armored forces through vehicle development alone. Defense planning must assume armor inferiority and develop tactics accordingly. Priority should shift to man-portable anti-tank weapons, static defenses, and doctrine emphasizing ambush and close-range engagement where enemy armor advantages are minimized. In other words, Japan couldn't build tanks to fight American tanks, so Japanese soldiers would have to fight American tanks with lighter weapons, from prepared positions, accepting massive casualties as the price of inflicting any damage at all. Lieutenant Colonel Hara received a copy of the final report in mid-September 1944. He read it in his office at the Chiba facility, the captured Sherman visible through his window, sitting in the testing yard like an accusation. That evening, he wrote in his personal diary, later published as part of his memoirs in 1978, "We have been building fireworks stands and calling them fortresses. The Americans have been building fortresses and calling them standard equipment. There is no recovering from such a fundamental difference in philosophy and capability." The Sherman testing program at Chiba continued through September and into early October of 1944, but the focus shifted from evaluation to desperate adaptation. If Japan couldn't match American tanks, perhaps Japanese forces could at least learn how to kill them more effectively. The captured Sherman became a target, subjected to every anti-tank weapon in the Imperial Army's arsenal. On September 20th, 1944, engineers positioned the Sherman at various ranges and angles to test Japanese anti-tank capabilities. The results were dispiriting. The standard infantry anti-tank rifle, the Type 97 20mm weapon, could not penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor at any range. Even side shots at close range produced only superficial damage. The weapon that Japanese infantry had relied upon since 1937 was utterly inadequate against modern American armor. The Type 1 47mm anti-tank gun, the standard towed weapon for Japanese infantry divisions, performed marginally better but still poorly. At 500 meters, firing at the Sherman's frontal armor, the weapon achieved 0 penetrations in 12 shots. At 200 meters, with carefully aimed shots at the lower hull, the gun managed 3 penetrations out of 15 attempts. Only at point-blank range, under 100 meters, could the Type 1 gun reliably penetrate Sherman armor, and even then, only if firing at specific weak points with armor-piercing ammunition. These results were devastating for Japanese defensive planning. The Type 1 47mm gun was positioned in coastal defenses throughout the home islands, on Pacific islands, and in fortified positions across occupied territories. Thousands of these weapons were deployed, and now it was clear they were inadequate. At the ranges where they could effectively engage a Sherman, American infantry support would already be suppressing the gun positions. Japanese anti-tank crews would have to hold fire, letting enemy armor approach to near point-blank range, accepting withering fire just to have a chance of achieving a kill. The Type 4 75mm anti-tank gun, a newer weapon just entering service in 1944, performed better. At 800 meters, it could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor consistently. But production of this weapon was minimal, perhaps 200 units by war's end, and it was heavy, difficult to conceal, and required a well-trained crew to operate effectively. Japan simply didn't have enough of them and wouldn't, no matter how long the war continued. The most effective weapons against the Sherman were the Type 3 anti-tank mines and magnetic anti-tank charges carried by close assault teams. But these required Japanese soldiers to approach American tanks on foot, under fire, and attach explosives manually or lure them over buried mines. It was a tactic born of desperation, not strength. The testing report noted clinically, engagement of enemy armor with close assault tactics will result in severe infantry casualties even in successful actions. This approach is sustainable only when defending fixed positions where terrain can be prepared and withdrawal is not required. What the report meant, in plain language, was that Japanese soldiers could stop American tanks by dying in sufficient numbers. There was no other option. While weapons testing continued at Chiba, military intelligence began interrogating American prisoners of war who had served in tank units. On Saipan, American forces had taken relatively few Japanese prisoners, but Japanese forces had captured several dozen American POWs during the campaign, some of whom were tankers. These men were brought to facilities near Tokyo for questioning about American tank tactics, training, and doctrine. The interrogations revealed yet another layer of American advantage. American tank crews received months of specialized training at facilities like Fort Knox in Kentucky, where they learned not just how to operate their vehicles, but how to fight as coordinated units. They trained on the exact tanks they would use in combat, practicing gunnery, maneuver, and maintenance, until procedures became second nature. By contrast, Japanese tank crews often received minimal training on actual tanks due to fuel shortages and equipment scarcity. Many Japanese tankers learned their trade on wooden mock-ups or obsolete vehicles, only seeing their actual combat tanks weeks before deployment. The American prisoners described a logistical system that seemed fantastical to their Japanese interrogators. Sherman tanks, they explained, were standardized across the entire American military. Parts were interchangeable. Maintenance manuals were comprehensive and widely distributed. Replacement tanks arrived regularly. If a Sherman threw a track or broke down, recovery vehicles, specialized tanks designed specifically for retrieving disabled armor, would tow it to rear area maintenance units where trained mechanics would repair it, often within days. The tank would return to service, usually with the same crew. Japanese tank maintenance, by comparison, was primitive. Spare parts were scarce and often not interchangeable between production batches. Maintenance manuals were limited and sometimes inaccurate. If a Japanese tank broke down during combat, it was frequently abandoned because Japan had few recovery vehicles and limited ability to repair complex mechanical failures in forward areas. Crews were reassigned to new tanks, if new tanks were available, breaking unit cohesion and forcing soldiers to adapt to unfamiliar vehicles under combat conditions. One American tank sergeant, captured on Saipan after his Sherman was knocked out, told his interrogators something that was included in intelligence summaries. "We knew if we got hit and had to bail out, there'd be another Sherman for us in a few days. That made it easier to be aggressive. You guys don't have that, do you?" The sergeant was right. Japanese tankers knew that each tank was irreplaceable, each loss permanent. This knowledge bred caution, hesitancy, and a defensive mindset antithetical to effective armored warfare. American tank crews could take risks because they operated within a system that could absorb losses and regenerate capability. Japanese crews hoarded their scarce vehicles, avoiding risks because no replacement was coming. By October of 1944, the strategic implications of the Sherman testing program were being briefed at the highest levels of Japanese military command. On October 18, 1944, Lieutenant General Yoshijiro Umezu, Chief of the Army General Staff, received a presentation based on the Chiba findings. The presentation included photographs of the Sherman, tables comparing specifications, and tactical assessments of engagement scenarios. Umezu's response, recorded in staff meeting minutes, was telling: if these assessments are accurate, successful defense of the home islands against enemy armor will require complete revision of current defensive doctrine. We cannot match enemy material superiority. We must therefore maximize terrain advantages, accept asymmetric engagement ratios, and prepare the population for sacrifices exceeding any previous campaign. This was the moment when Japan's military leadership confronted an uncomfortable truth. The war could not be won through conventional military means. The industrial gap was too vast, the material disparity too extreme. The only remaining strategy was to make invasion so costly that America would negotiate a conditional peace rather than pursue total victory. Japanese tanks, obsolete as they were, would have to serve this strategy not by defeating American armor, but by delaying it, by forcing American forces to expend time and resources destroying fixed defenses, by buying time measured in lives. The captured Sherman at Chiba became a teaching tool. Selected officers from armored units across Japan were brought to the facility to see the American tank, to sit inside it, to understand what they would face if American forces landed on the home islands. For many of these officers, seeing the Sherman was a profound psychological shock. Major Takahashi Masao, commander of a Type 97 Chiha company stationed near Osaka, visited Chiba in November of 1944. In his memoirs, published in 1976, he described his reaction. I had commanded tanks for 5 years. I had fought in China and believed our equipment adequate. Standing beside the Sherman, I understood immediately that my men and I were obsolete. The American machine was not just better, it was from a different era of warfare. We were samurai with swords facing riflemen. The courage of my crews would matter nothing against such a disparity. Takahashi's analogy was apt. The Meiji Restoration of the 1860s had forced Japan to modernize rapidly, to abandon feudal military traditions and adopt Western technology or face colonization. Now, 8 decades later, Japan faced another technological gap. But this time there was no time to modernize, no opportunity to catch up. The war was happening now, and Japan's tanks were swords in a rifle age. Throughout late 1944 and into 1945, Japanese tank doctrine underwent desperate revision. Training manuals were rewritten to emphasize ambush tactics, camouflage discipline, and close-range engagement. Tank units were instructed to avoid open-field engagements with American armor, and instead position their vehicles in prepared hull-down positions, dug in so only the turret was exposed, where they could ambush passing enemy columns. Tanks were to be used as mobile pillboxes, not maneuver elements. This represented the complete abandonment of armored warfare as the rest of the world understood it. Tanks were designed for movement, for breakthrough operations, for exploiting success and disrupting enemy formations. Japanese doctrine now reduced tanks to static defensive weapons, hidden in tree lines or behind rubble, waiting to take a single shot before being destroyed by return fire or air attack. It was an admission that Japanese armor had no offensive capability against modern opponents. The tank development programs that continued in late 1944 reflected this grim reality. The Type 4 Cheeto medium tank, which might have achieved rough parity with the Sherman, was abandoned after only 6 prototypes were built. It was too complex, too expensive, and too late to matter. Resources shifted instead to the Type 3 Kachi amphibious tank, a specialized vehicle for coastal defense, and to self-propelled gun platforms that could provide fire support from concealed positions. Most tellingly, Japanese industry increased production of the Type 4 Chi-Nu tank destroyer, essentially a Type 97 Chiha chassis fitted with a larger 75mm gun in a fixed casemate. The Chi-Nu couldn't match a Sherman's versatility, mobility, or crew protection, but it could kill one at range if it got the first shot. That was enough. Japanese doctrine now assumed that Japanese armor would fire first and die immediately after. One shot, one kill, one loss. The math was brutal. Trade one Chi-Nu for one Sherman, and eventually America would run out of Shermans. Except America wouldn't run out of Shermans. That was the fatal flaw in the logic. American production capacity was so vast that Japan could trade 10 tanks for one Sherman and still lose the attrition war. The captured Sherman at Chiba proved this with its construction details, modular components, standardized parts, signs of high-volume manufacturing processes. This wasn't a hand-built machine. It was an industrial product, replicable at scale. Japanese intelligence, analyzing and manufacturing marks and production techniques visible on the captured Sherman, estimated the vehicle was one of approximately 49,000 M4 variants produced by American industry by mid-1944. The actual figure was higher, over 55,000 by that date. But even the conservative estimate was staggering. Japan's entire tank force, accumulated over a decade of production, numbered approximately 6,000 vehicles of all types. America had produced nearly 10 times that many Shermans alone in less than 3 years. As 1945 began, the strategic situation grew increasingly desperate for Japan. American forces landed on Luzon in the Philippines in January, on Iwo Jima in February, and on Okinawa in April. Each campaign featured Sherman tanks in significant numbers, and each campaign confirmed the lessons learned at Chiba. Japanese anti-tank defenses, even when well prepared and fiercely defended, could slow but not stop American armor. On Iwo Jima, Japanese forces employed every defensive tactic developed from the Sherman testing program. Tanks were dug in as pillboxes, anti-tank guns positioned in concealed positions, and close assault teams prepared with magnetic mines and pole charges. The island's volcanic rock provided excellent defensive terrain. Yet American forces, with extensive tank support, secured the island in 36 days despite fanatical resistance. Japanese armor, what little was present, was systematically destroyed without achieving significant results. Okinawa presented an even starker demonstration. The island's Japanese defenders included the 2nd Tank Regiment, equipped with Type 95 Heigo light tanks and Type 97 Chiha medium tanks. American forces landed with the 7th Infantry Division's tank battalions and Marine tank units, all equipped with Shermans, along with heavier M26 Pershing tanks for particularly tough positions. Japanese armor attempted several counterattacks in the campaign's early weeks. Each was catastrophically defeated. The most notable engagement occurred near Kakazu Ridge on April 12, 1945, when elements of the 2nd Tank Regiment's 3rd Company attempted a night assault against American positions. 13 Type 97. Chiha tanks, supported by infantry, attacked along the coastal road toward American lines. Sherman tanks from the 1st Marine Tank Battalion, equipped with infrared searchlights and warned by radar-equipped destroyer escorts offshore, were waiting. The engagement lasted less than 30 minutes. All 13 Japanese tanks were destroyed. No American tanks were lost. Reports of this engagement reached Tokyo within days. Lieutenant Colonel Hara, still at the Chiba facility where the captured Sherman remained under study, read the after-action summaries with a sense of inevitability. The lessons learned from testing the Sherman had predicted exactly this outcome. Japanese tanks attacking American positions would be destroyed with minimal American losses. There was no tactical innovation, no amount of courage or skill that could overcome the material disparity. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By spring of 1945, The captured Sherman at Chiba had been thoroughly studied, tested, and dissected. Engineers had mapped every system, measured every component, and documented every design feature. The tank was in pieces now, its turret removed, its engine disassembled, its armor plates cut apart for metallurgical analysis. It no longer looked like a threat, just scattered parts in a testing facility. But the knowledge it provided remained urgent because everyone knew what was coming. American forces were preparing to invade the home islands. Operation Downfall, as the Americans called it, would begin with Operation Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu. In November 1945, followed by Operation Coronet, the invasion of the Kanto Plain near Tokyo. In March 1946. Japanese intelligence estimated that American forces would land with thousands of tanks. They were right. Planning documents, discovered after the war, showed American forces intended to deploy over 3,000 tanks in the initial Kyushu landings alone. Against this force, Japan could field perhaps 1,200 tanks of all types, most of them obsolete Type 95 Heigo light tanks and Type 97 Chiha medium tanks, that the Sherman testing program had proven inadequate. The newer Type 3 Chi-Nu and Type 4 Chai-To tanks, which might have some chance against American armor, numbered in the dozens. It was an absurd mismatch, and everyone involved knew it. Japanese defensive planning for Operation Ketsugo, the defense of the home islands, reflected this knowledge. Tanks were assigned to static defensive positions, dug into hillsides and coastal cliffs where they could fire on invasion beaches or inland approach routes. They would have one mission: fire until destroyed. No retreat, no maneuver, no combined arms operations, just static guns in fixed positions, buying time with blood. The psychological impact on Japanese tank crews was severe. These were professional soldiers, many with years of experience now being told their vehicles were obsolete, and their mission was to die in place. Major Takahashi, whose company was assigned to coastal defense near Osaka, wrote in his diary in June of 1945, "We train each day, maintaining vehicles that are already dead. The men know. They have seen the intelligence reports, heard about Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They ask me what chance we have. I tell them we fight with the weapons we possess, not the weapons we wish we had. But at night, I wonder if I am sending them to pointless deaths. The American tank we tested at Chiba haunts me. It is still there, torn apart, studied, understood, and still we have no answer to it. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki on August 9th, followed by the Soviet invasion of Manchuria on August 9th, rendered the question of tank quality moot. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. Operation Downfall was canceled. The defensive positions prepared to meet American tanks were never tested in battle. The Japanese tank crews, prepared to die in their obsolete machines, would live, though many would struggle for years with the knowledge of how close they had come to annihilation. After the war, American occupation forces discovered the remains of the captured Sherman at the Chiba testing facility. The tank, disassembled and scattered across the testing grounds, was identified by its serial number, USA 356288, belonging to the 2nd Marine Tank Battalion, 6th Marine Division. American intelligence officers collected the Japanese testing reports, now valuable historical documents, and interviewed the engineers and officers who had participated in the program. Lieutenant Colonel Hara was among those interviewed. In October of 1945, speaking to an American Army intelligence officer through a translator, he was asked what conclusions he had drawn from studying the Sherman. His answer, recorded in the interview transcript, was blunt. "We concluded that we had already lost the war. Not in August of 1945, when the Emperor spoke of surrender, but years earlier, when American industry began producing machines like that tank. We were fighting an industrial power with an agrarian army. Courage cannot defeat steel, and steel cannot be made from willpower. We learned this truth at Chiba, but we learned it too late to matter. The American officer conducting the interview, Captain Robert Harrison, asked a follow-up question. Had the testing program changed Japanese tactics? Hara's response was telling. We changed our tactics to account for our inferiority. We planned to fight your tanks with mines, with close assault teams, with dug-in guns firing at point-blank range. We planned to trade 10 Japanese lives for 1 American tank and hope that your democracy would tire of the cost. This was not tactics. This was desperation called tactics. The interview transcripts make difficult reading. They reveal an officer who understood the futility of Japan's position, but had no power to change it, who knew his men would die for a cause already lost, but could not tell them, who studied American equipment with professional interest while recognizing it as evidence of Japan's inevitable defeat. In the years after the war, several officers who participated in the Sherman testing program published memoirs or gave interviews. Their accounts consistently emphasized the psychological shock of confronting American industrial superiority in tangible form. Seeing production statistics is abstract. Sitting inside a machine that embodies those statistics is visceral. The Sherman at Chiba was more than a tank. It was proof that Japan had been lying to itself about its chances of victory. Major Takahashi, in his 1976 memoir Steel and Spirit, wrote, "The Sherman we tested was the truth made metal. For 3 years we had been told that Japanese spirit would overcome American materialism, that our warrior tradition would defeat their industrial production, that quality would triumph over quantity. The Sherman proved these claims were lies. American industry produced both quality and quantity. Their materialism created machines superior to ours in every measurable way. Our spirit was noble, perhaps, but nobility does not penetrate armor plate." The captured Sherman's influence extended beyond immediate military planning. After the war, when Japan began rebuilding its defense forces under American guidance, the lessons learned at Chiba informed Japanese military acquisition policy. Japan's ground self-defense force, established in 1954, would not attempt to develop indigenous tanks until it had industrial capacity comparable to modern standards. Early Japanese post-war tanks were built under American license or with American technical assistance. The memory of the Chaiha versus Sherman disparity was too fresh, the lesson too clear. There was no point building tanks Japan couldn't support with adequate industry, training, and logistics. The Type 61 main battle tank, Japan's first indigenous post-war tank design, entered service in 1961. 16 years after the war's end. It mounted a 90-millimeter gun, had modern fire controls, and was designed with the benefit of American technical knowledge. Even then, Japanese military planners were cautious, producing only 560 units over 18 years. The memory of building thousands of obsolete tanks that couldn't compete with American armor had left a lasting impression. The captured Sherman itself, despite its historical significance, did not survive as a complete vehicle. After being disassembled at Chiba, the components were scattered, some used for continuing studies, others scrapped in the post-war years when metal was desperately needed for reconstruction. No museum preserved it, no memorial marked where it had been tested. The tank that revealed the truth of Japan's obsolescence became, itself, obsolete and was erased. But the knowledge it provided persisted. In Japanese military academies today, the Sherman testing program is taught as a case study in the importance of honest intelligence assessment and the dangers of self-deception in military planning. Students learned that Japan's tank designers were not incompetent. They were working with limited resources and different doctrinal assumptions. But they also learned that assumptions must be tested against reality, and that reality, when it arrives in the form of a captured enemy tank, must be believed no matter how uncomfortable the truth. In American military history, the captured Sherman episode is a footnote, if it's mentioned at all. America produced so many Shermans, nearly 50,000 total, that losing one to capture on Saipan was statistically insignificant. The tank's journey to Japan and the testing program it spawned are interesting details, perhaps, but not central to the American narrative of industrial dominance and inevitable victory. For Japan, however, the story remains significant. It represents the moment when the illusion collapsed, when the lies told to sustain morale confronted irrefutable physical evidence. The Sherman at Chiba was the messenger that brought news of defeat, and messengers bearing such news are not forgotten. Lieutenant Colonel Hara Masao continued serving in Japan's post-war self-defense forces, retiring as a colonel in 1962. He spent his retirement years writing military history and lecturing at the National Defense Academy. He died in 1988 at age 83. In an interview given shortly before his death, he was asked what single experience from his military career had most influenced his thinking. Without hesitation, he answered, "Standing beside that American tank in August of 1944, understanding that everything I had been told was wrong. That moment of clarity, brutal as it was, taught me that the truth is kinder than comforting lies. Lies kill soldiers. The truth, however painful, at least gives them a chance to prepare." The morning air was thick and humid over the Chiba proving grounds on August 7, 1944, when Lieutenant Colonel Hara first stood beside the captured Sherman. The summer heat made the steel uncomfortable to touch. The white star was still visible beneath hastily applied Japanese markings. The tank sat silent, a green machine that held secrets Japan desperately needed to know. By the time the testing program concluded 3 months later, those secrets had been revealed. The Sherman was superior in firepower, armor, mobility, crew efficiency, visibility, survivability, and manufacturability. Japanese tanks were obsolete in every measurable category. Japan's entire armored force, accumulated over a decade, could not match what American industry produced in a single quarter. The war was lost, had always been lost, had been lost the moment Japan challenged an industrial power capable of building 49,000 Shermans, while Japan struggled to build 6,000 tanks of any kind. The captured Sherman at Chiba told this truth in steel and engineering, in armor plate and hydraulic systems, in vision blocks and turret baskets and wet ammunition storage. It was a truth that Lieutenant Colonel Hara and his fellow officers could not ignore, could not explain away, could not overcome with courage or tactics or spirit. It was the truth that ended empires and marked the difference between 19th century powers and 20th century superpowers. Japan had tested a captured Sherman and discovered its entire tank fleet was obsolete. But more than that, Japan had discovered that obsolescence in modern industrial warfare was a death sentence that no amount of valor could commute. The only question left was how many would die before the inevitable end. The answer, mercifully, came in August of 1945, when surrender saved Japan from learning the full cost of fighting American armor with obsolete machines and desperate courage. The tank crews positioned in coastal defenses never faced the invasion. The static pillboxes never fired their one shot. The close assault teams never rushed American armor with magnetic mines. The defensive doctrine developed from studying the Sherman was never tested. But it would have failed. The testing program at Chiba had proven that with mathematical certainty. Japanese tanks were obsolete. Japanese tactics were desperate. and Japanese industry could not close the gap. The captured Sherman had revealed all of this in the summer of 1944, 14 months before the war's end, when there was still time to understand but no time to change the outcome. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.